Hi, I'm Michelle Snyder. I am the founder and vice president of the Foundation for Research of the Enman Archive. And one of our most precious and fruitful vendors is Nick Stevens, who has done incredible computer graphics of the starships that Robert Duncan Enman designed.
Right, Nick Stevens. I basically am now largely retired from an IT career. I did consider trying to become a full-time computer graphics guy, but I knew quite a few of them, and it really didn't sound that great. They weren't paid a lot. They had huge workloads, and most of it was not that interesting. I think the one decisive thing for me was chatting to someone who worked on the Harry Potter films. I thought, oh, that sounds cool. That sounds great. He said, no, I've spent the last 6 weeks making glasses look shinier. And I don't have to take bad jobs just because they're well paid. So for me, that worked out kind of well. Initially, I studied astronomy at university. Okay, I suppose the most early relevant interests were seeing, I think, one of the Gemini missions on TV when I was about 8, something like that. And getting an encyclopedia from my grandparents, which had sections on astronomy. And I kind of rapidly realized that you could go out and look at this stuff and see the spacecraft passing overhead and look at the night sky and see all the originals. I went on to take astronomy as a degree. I didn't complete that.
That's complicated.
I was having way too much fun doing other things rather than studying, basically, so it was entirely my fault. And after that, I moved into IT. I mean, I never really considered it as a career anyway. It was as good as any other science degree for the kind of things I was interested in. Very involved in amateur astronomy for a long time until computers arrived that could actually start doing something useful and pretty. And at that point, particularly given that I was based in London, where there's hideous amounts of street light and light pollution and whatever, I sort of slowly moved over into something a bit more graphical. As you'll have gathered, it was something I was interested in from an early age, and I finally got around to buying myself some professional grade software. There wasn't anything like Blender then. You had to basically pay about something like $3,000 for something capable. And I'd come into a bit of cash, so I took a deep breath and got it and started hanging around in the forums. Ooh. The subject I was interested in. That was it, really. And there were some very helpful people, including pros, some of whom we beat up with and whatever. One key person, Rich Salkin, if I'm perfect, he was so helpful on those forums. I think he was one of the lead graphics guys on the recent Dune films, to give you an idea of where he ended up now. And he was so encouraging and positive. There were plenty of others as well. But he was the one, basically, I think when I was doing my Jodrell Bank radio telescope, insanely complicated, and he said, do it all in geometry, you won't regret it. And I'm looking at all these bolts and nuts and things and going, partly insane trying to get my head around all the symmetries and repeated stuff. So yeah, I suspect that's still happening. Certainly there's a lot of big, busy Blender forums. Now at that point, I was looking at what other people were doing, and there was a lot of people doing things like Star Trek spaceships and whatever.
Yeah, like Rick Sternbach, he works on a lot of that kind of material.
Yeah, he's well, he got to create it, though. There's a difference between copying it as an amateur and being in the captain's chair, so to speak. I don't know if you know, but in the last Picard series, Rick got one of the spaceships named after him. Sternbach, he was really pleased about that, because he's also an IAAA member. And that was really cool. It wasn't hard to tell how pleased he was with that. But anyway, yeah, everyone else was doing those. I was a beginner. I wasn't as good as them, and there was no way I was going to match the quality of what was done. So I started looking at things that nobody else had actually taken on. As soon as I got to the point where I could produce something.
Like what?
Like the Soviet spacecraft being the obvious thing. You
have a lot of those on your website. I saw a lot of the pictures there.
Again, yeah, because no one else was doing them, it was remarkably easy to do the best model of a Soviet spacecraft, as nobody else had done one. So it gave me a bit of breathing space while I got better and while I learned. In particular, when I started finding out more about the Soviet Enman moon rocket, and started digging into that, which was just insane. I mean, you mentioned the website, and there's also like the Soviet space Substack,
Mhm.
making contact with some Russians and finding people who knew it. And I got a lot better actually researching and digging into what was going on. And now I've got these big piles of obscure, recently declassified documents I'm trying to sort into something. Yeah, but there's a chap called Alex Schliadinsky who was first, because I'd been going from the badly available photos, and someone put me in touch with him because he didn't generally like being pestered by people. And he sent me all this stuff with dimensions to the millimeter. And I'm thinking,
Wow.
what? And
Well, you can do that with a computer too. I mean, that's, you have.
But he'd actually visited the crash sites and relics scattered around Baikonur. And if it was around, he had measured it, and he then treated it like a giant jigsaw puzzle. So at that point,
Wow.
I had sources no one else did, a subject no one else had done, and I really started digging into it. So yeah, but generally, yes, trying to do something that no one else had tackled.
Well, you're still in it. This is true.
If anyone's watching this who wants to get started, I'd say find a subject you're interested in, preferably something obscure. If you know more about the source material than other people, you will have an edge when it comes to actually making models and renders or art of it.
Mm-hmm.
They won't know the details that you do. And again, when you're getting started, one of the great things is, to some degree, you can compensate with time over a skill. Yeah, a pro, like I've seen him produce an entire movie quality spaceship in 2 days flat, whizzing over it. So, no, that would have taken me about 2 years at that time. But I could have got there. I think I could have got there eventually. So as a beginner, you can take your time, you can pause and think, hang on, how do I make something that shape and connect it?
The learning curve, they just happen to get longer when there's more details.
Yeah. Again, yes, exactly. That's another great thing. Yeah, start with the big shapes and go down, making finer and finer details. Mm-hmm. I think it's the fine details that generally sell it.
Well, it is. I've watched you do that with the Enman stuff. So tell me a little bit about the International Association of Astronomical Artists. I had to glance. I wanted to say it right. So because I know Sternbach is also a member, isn't he? And we've seen some of the artwork. And Gazard. So tell me about that.
International Astronomical Artists. It was founded in 1982, by a small group who basically had the shared interest of getting it accurate. They all tended to think that making it accurate, it wasn't like a constraint on the imagination. It made it better. It made it more useful, that kind of thing. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be figurative. But I mean, the way I tend to sum it up is thou shalt not mislead. So yeah, if you want a full screen start, realistically, it would blind you in a fraction of a second, but yeah, make it look bright, full screen, whatever, that's good. We have our listserv at the moment. The website's down, unfortunately, after some technical issues with it being hacked. They're working on the new one. But yeah, we can sort of share ideas, and if you are a member, you get to talk to the people like Rick Sternbach, who often chairs the monthly Zoom gatherings we have. It's great. It's 50 years. I think just over 50 years. I did a video.
So when did you draw your first Enman starship, the pulse ship with the round tank on it? When did you first do that? Before you met us, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it was relatively recent for me, about 6 years back. I basically tried searching before the interview and found the oldest files I seem to have with the modelling seem to be about 6 years old. I think in some ways it didn't meet my criteria of not having been done by anyone else.
No, that one actually has been, we use that one for our logo because it's been around since what, 76, 72, something like that. And it's been drawn by, I mean, countless numbers of science fiction artists have drawn that ship. And it's part of the route that we took when we did our branding. So how did we first meet? How did that work? I don't remember. Did Jay contact you?
I'm not sure myself. But I mean, I started doing things with it. Basically, when I came across it again somewhere or another and looked at it a bit more closely, and I think at that point I started thinking, hang on, the design is open enough, loose enough that I can have quite a bit of fun with it. I can add fine details. It's not going to be wrong. I mean, one of the things I really liked is the basic idea is so simple. Big frozen ball of fuel, protect all the other stuff behind, stick an engine on the bottom. The basic
we did a flyby. I think we saw your flyby.
Yeah, and I think Graham
I think that's how it worked.
Yeah, Graham Gazzard has also done some work for you, I know. I love what he does with strong colour and stuff, and he did some renders of it. And I think you probably were doing a search for Enman Starship and got in touch. I have vague memories of some early exchanges before we got going and actually started committing to getting things done.
Yeah, I mean, you were exceptional in our minds in terms of how you handled the way the ships looked, because you know, the Association of Artists, they want to make it right. Bob Enman was a stinker. I mean, you can't have something not be correct and have it work. That's just, and he wasn't doing this just to make a pretty sci-fi design. He was designing these to sustain human life on a journey. So we're trying to do the best we can to give you everything possible so that we can make it believable.
Well, that's one of the great things about working with your team. You've got the references, you've got the in-depth stuff.
We're the only ones.
Say, hang on, how does this bit compare to that bit in scale? Jay will go off and dig around and say, yeah, it's just this bit compared with that one, and then we work and we correct it and bring it together. But yeah, I mean, it's in general, I like working with engineers. It generally goes well because they have a very clear idea of what they've designed and can answer all the questions. And they will generally, not always, but generally let me free to make it look good.
Well, you're supposed to, and that's funny because Jay's not an engineer. His life was spent in the theater, movie, TVs, and he has a mass communications degree. And he's an incredible artist, but he's a polymath. He can do anything. And we've been learning from Bob Enman since 1988. And Jay's specialty in the archive is the starship engineering. So he has almost earned himself a degree in that subject. He's the only conduit we have between what Bob wrote about his visions for a starship culture on Earth and off Earth and the public. And that's been our challenge, is trying to get this communicated. And you have been a great benefit because your stuff is just, it's mesmerizing. It really is.
Jay's a great bridge between the technical and the visual.
He is. He's good with astronomy and geometry, but he's an excellent designer. And even in the 80s, when we were doing graphics, business to business, we had a company called Sherelle Graphics. There weren't computers to do this. I did pen and ink work. I did the design work by hand. And I'm an artist. I've been drawing since I was 2. I've been teaching art for 40 years. And he'd come along and say, you need to move this. It'll look better. And he was always right. It was infuriating, but I learned that it always benefited the work, which is probably good training because Bob Enman had no patience for things that were wrong. And he wasn't diplomatic about explaining them, but he was right, and he was an amazing man.
At the moment, we're working on assembling a pole ship above the shipyard.
Oh, excellent!
You'd like me to edit that?
I saw the latest one where the chambers are coming out and the globes are being manufactured. That's really cool. You guys are doing great. So let me ask you something. Would you go out on a colonization project or work at the shipyard?
I think probably not. It's right now, I just don't think the human side is ready. It's not really developed since Apollo to any real degree. They've abandoned all the nuclear stuff and all the stuff that...
Well, we're going to have that. If this was in place,
exactly,
we would have grown into it. I'm assuming that when the time comes and we have a space culture, that there'll be a lot of people who will go then that won't go now.
I mean, if you look at something like Mars, you're going to be living in a dusty cave and never see the sky.
I don't want to live on Mars. I wouldn't go to Mars, and I'd go on an Echolance and just go. Echolances don't land. They don't colonize. They're exploring ships. That to me sounds fun. So Bob Enman said to me, so remember, he said, outside your windows, which there aren't any of, but what you see is outside of that, it never changes. Your view never changes. But, I mean, stars are so far apart. You think you're moving, but that doesn't make the scenery change. I said, Bob, I at this point, I lived in an apartment in framing. I said, my view never changes out my living room window. What is the difference? That's what, I don't know, I'd go.
I mean, for me, one of the really bad things about Apollo was it only boots on the ground count. Now, if you ask me, would I like to go to Phobos? see a small world and whiz above a couple of thousand miles up, looking at that would be
Wouldn't that be awesome?
much, much better.
Oh yeah, you and I are of the same opinion. We don't need to land on the ground. We just need to see this beauty of stuff that's been created and floating out there for us to see.
I don't know if you know, but originally the Soviets weren't interested in the moon at all. It was only when Kennedy got it going. The N1 was originally intended to do flybys of Mars and Venus to get people out there, to get them to look, but that was abandoned.
Well, interesting that Bob Enman had, did Jay ever talk to you about, oh, there's a chart, there's a graph that Enman made. He said, if you have to use the right machinery and they have to be in the right place to get the maximum amount of information. So you got to start with what information do you want? If you want to know how many mountain ranges there are on a planet, landing does not tell you that.
Yeah.
But if you want to know what the soil is made of, flying by does not tell you that. So you have to start with what you want and then back it up. And he had this chart and they used it and they still use it to figure out what equipment and things. Why did they wait until the last moonshot to send a geologist?
Yeah, there was a lovely phrase I saw in a book about Mars, which is getting a good photo of Olympus Mons from Mars is like trying to get a good photo of France from England.
Well, it is. So, but you know, Bob being the world master geologist, he was furious that they waited. It's like it's a rock that we're going to investigate. How can you investigate a new body of geology and not send a geologist? Maybe there wasn't one that wanted to go the first time, but come on, this was the 17th moonshot.
they wanted to go and they had to fight to get that.
Yeah. So, what would you like to see develop here from the future in the future in terms of space exploration and colonization? What would be a good plan that you would think would be the best one to follow?
Well, I think the key thing, which is beginning to happen, actually not even beginning with SpaceX, is to get the cost down. The cost of getting something up to orbit is absolutely key. And that is really, really good. At the moment, it's still all your eggs in one basket. I'm really excited by the mission to the Trojans of Jupiter. Everyone, oh no, it's not a big planet, it's just some rocks. No, that's where you're going to find the water, that's where you're going to find oxygen.
That's where all the resources are.
Yep, and not just that, but basically scientists think that most of them are captured Kuiper-Belt orbits, so it's like you're getting out to the outermost parts of the solar system. They're visiting something like 12 of them, I think. I mean, yeah, it's not getting the headlines. To me, that's great. One of the few things I do think that has been
I haven't seen anything about that.
Exactly. No one's paying attention. I think it's called Lucy.
That's good right now, okay? We don't need that.
I think one of the things the ISS has achieved is people have now demonstrated you can make hardware that will work in space for decades.
Yes.
The reliability has gone up hugely. Okay, there's still supply going up and down. But that to me is a big, big step. So get the price down, look at small bodies, not big ones, get people out there again, but don't worry about landing until you can actually do it.
Well, we did, but we need to do it again. And one of the things that happened when they put the moratorium in place and canceled the space program, people are afraid. They're upset because their Facebook account gets canceled. They're not upset because they canceled the space program. It's like, you know, unbelievable. But we need to get back to the practical things that make that happen. And that's what we need to do, is we need to build up. Bob said they set us back 100 years by having a moratorium in the United States on systems development. So that's kind of where we have to start. Now we're going to make up for that time.
And abandoning all the nuclear systems. I mean, you don't need something like an Orion boomstick, as I've heard it called. Even the ion engine type stuff, that's much easier, much safer. That all went by the by as well. Because
the United States decided that they would interpret this agreement their way. And it's sad, but we can do this. That's interesting. You wanted, the price is something that is a consideration in any business, and this will be business.
Yeah. But also keep an eye on what India is doing. I mean, their Mars orbiter, it was done on something like 5% of the cost. That
really? Well, it's not surprising. I'm not sure that anybody could. I don't know how the United States spends so much money on getting nothing done, but that's another situation. I'm serious.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Cough, cough, Artemis, but
well, we won't go there.
But yeah, I mean, seriously, check out what that thing is doing. It's there, it works, it's reliable. and seriously, I've not checked the numbers, but off the top of my head, I don't think 5% is that bad an estimate. Now, again, if you get that down to that kind of price level, and they aren't using things like Falcon reusables for launch, which tells you it can go lower than that, think about sending the same design even out to the asteroids.
Well, if it works, why not reuse it? I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, send out 50 of them, find out which of the near Earth asteroids are worth visiting.
Well, there's got to be resources in asteroids. I mean, they're full of all the minerals and all the kinds of things that we look for.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things in the queue with Jay, which is pushed back from current projects, is the Psyche asteroid, the one that's almost pure metal, I think.
Yeah.
Now, quite apart from the economics of that, you've basically got the exposed core of a planet there, a chunk of exposed core of a planet. The scientific return should be huge, and that's on its way, and it's going there. And I'm hoping
exciting.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that we can basically, I've got a model of the Psyche that's fairly reasonable. We can do some cool visuals for that when the current wave of video work clears through.
So what do you see in terms of how we're developing the work for FREA? You communicate with Jay all the time, and you guys are putting forth some beautiful stuff. So what do you see in your mind as being as your future in doing this, and what we should be doing with the material? Got any ideas?
Oh, check with Jay. I keep throwing things that pass through my mind, and we're always going, wow, yeah, that's so cool. So
yeah, he says you send long emails about what about this and this and this, and then you negotiate them. So it is really good he's very excited to work with you. This has been an ongoing and very beneficial relationship for FREA. You've got how can people see your outstanding? Oh, is your website up? Your website is up.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you tell us how people can see what you do?
Nick-Stevens.com. That's probably the most active one. I'd normally point people at my IAAA gallery as well, but as I said, that one's down at the moment.
Well, how do you spell that? Your website. Stevens, how do you spell Stevens?
Nick-Stevens.com. Hopefully you can add it underneath. And the other thing which I'd really like to push is my show reel, because that's basically all the best.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
But in terms of where it's going, I mean, one of the great things, which also applies to learning CGI when you're working the same subject, is we are building up a huge, huge library of models, which means it gets faster. So modeling effort drops down and down as we go on. So if Jay came to me and said, okay, we want a shipyard over Io, we've got the ships, we got the vehicles, I've got models of all the big stuff. When we get to Psyche, we've got the pods, we've got the VPNs. I always get that mixed up.
Well, that's exciting, and you give us good
background. These things built. Every time we do another model, we add to the reserves we've got, so we can move more rapidly onto actually making video and still images and stuff. So yeah, it does seem that one of the challenges with the meetings I have with Jay is we can both get a bit overexcited and not terribly good at actually, hang on, we're meant to be signing off this month's work and working out what happens next month, aren't we? Yeah, but this is cool, Well,
see, now you found something that nobody else has done. You're very good at it, and it's really exciting as an artist to be able to do that.
Well, thank you. And it's also, I mean, the enthusiasm of your whole team is always really, really encouraging.
Well, your people should also go to the ensmanarchive.org and look at our gallery, because we try to keep it current with things that are going on there, and your work is there, and there are other artists also, like Graham Gazard's work is there, and I believe he uses some of your ship models, right? He's
the only person I trust with any model I've ever made. He always makes them look better than I do.
Well, he's good with the colors in the background.
I mean, he's so good at strong color, and it's something I really struggle with. So he's different, and he adds to it and he grows it, and whenever I pass something on, I'm always really excited to see where he goes with it. And again, that goes right back to the forum I mentioned, going back to Cades, when we were both sitting there and fighting to learn Lightwave together.
So you've known him for a while.
We've never actually met.
I mean, in terms of an internet relationship?
Not face to face, but it's always been forums and emails and chats and stuff. I want to use figures more. I want to use human figures more. It's not something I've been historically very good at, but I've been trying, not so much in work for you to get better. We've had a few figures in spacesuits, for example, because when you can get human figures moving in the scenes, then you get a real sense of scale. It's easier to the viewpoint of the person in there. So it might be a bit broad and vague, but get less technical and get more human elements in there.
I would really like to get you a sketch or and a good description of the Gracile spacesuit.
Mhm.
I don't know how they work. I know they cost a ton of money to make, and they're only, I mean, they use regular spacesuits for everything except for the ruling class, so to speak, in the maritime setup, like the admirals and the heralds and people that have position. They look to me like spandex, but they're not.
Yeah.
And he's even
I seem to remember reading of basically really tight fitting spacesuits, which solves a lot of the problem with joints and basically trying to walk inside a balloon.
And they also, in some of his stories that he wrote, there's scenes where he talks about the spacesuit, probably more like the spacesuits that we're familiar with, but built in, they keep you alive. They keep your temperature right. They make sure you have fluids. They can feed you. They can repair minor injuries. They can keep you in one position if you break something. So this is what all of their Starship fighting pilots wear. This is high-tech nano computer technology. And they also, in some of his stories that he wrote, there's scenes where he talks about the spacesuit, probably more like the spacesuits that we're familiar with, but built in, they keep you alive. They keep your temperature right. They make sure you have fluids. They can feed you. They can repair minor injuries. They can keep you in one position if you break something. So this is what all of their Starship fighting pilots wear. This is high-tech nano computer technology. I've seen old movies with those.
The idea of basically a one-man spaceship was much more common. There were little space taxis, as I think they tended to call them.
The Jetsons car. That came out of that, I'm sure. All right, so I've really enjoyed
a lot of the people on those kids shows, they really did pay attention to what was happening in the science. I mean,
they did.
Jerry Anderson, special effects people, they knew what was happening in the cutting edge research on aircraft and spacecraft, and they wanted to look convincing. So they used real designs a lot of the time, or elements of real.
Then it became way too philosophical. It became, Bob Enman said, hard science fiction left and philosophical science fiction came in, and not every author has good philosophy. And he just put it that way to be polite.
Yeah, exactly.
So when we start doing our science fiction stories, are you going to be able to like give us stuff for those?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of different. In that would probably mean that more creating of the design involvement for me.
Creating, that's a good word. But his science fiction doesn't use any technology that he didn't think could be made.
Yeah.
He was doing this in the 80s. We should have had our Starship world already because it was all set to go.
Yeah. I mean, whenever people seem surprised at how optimistic we were back about 1970, I don't know if you'll have seen it. There's a wonderful photo of the Paris Air Show in, I think, about 1918, and they've got hot air balloons there. And it was literally 60 years later that people were walking on the moon. You went from hot air balloons to walking on the moon.
Well, that's because we took the idea and built on it.
That's what we thought, okay.
What we're supposed to do.
Went to Mars, that should be about another 10 years.
Right. So I've really appreciated your time here, Nick, and you've really added a lot of information to my head, and I'm sure that this interview will be interesting to people who want to see more about what we're doing and about what you're doing.
Okay, let me know if you need the links written down to put underneath. So,
well, I think I was using what was the name of that program? Microsoft has a recording program that will give you the words. I figured out how to use it. So if we should probably make, well, what's that called? Transcribe. We should probably make a transcription of the interview once it's edited, and I'll make that available. That's a good idea. I will be sure to have Justin do that. But thank you very much. You don't look sick. You look great. I hope you feel
Yeah.
better, not worse.
But fortunately, now that I'm working for myself, I don't have to sound worse than I am. So.
Isn't it great? I come down sometimes in the morning and sit at my desk in my pajamas because I can, unless I'm on Zoom, and then I just have to put a nice top on. I mean, just this is such a good world. Anyway, life is great. And thank you very much. I hope you have a magnificent week.
Okay, thank you. Some friends are coming out to visit in their first time in Moldova, so
Oh, wow. That's excellent.
looking forward to that.
All right. You have a good one.